In our headlines on this Tuesday afternoon, October 24th, here in South Korea, President Yoon Suk-yeol sees the signing of a $2.4 billion deal between South Korea and Saudi Arabia to build a gas processing plant in the Jeju gas field, as well as broader collaboration on the NEOM Smart City project. And Palestinian militants released 2 more Israeli hostages Monday as Israeli forces intensify their aerial bombings of Gaza, hitting over 300 targets in the northern part of the Strip over the past 24 hours as Washington sends its military advisors to Israel. Meanwhile, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi is reportedly scheduled to arrive in Washington later this week for bilateral talks, amid much anticipation about a possible summit between the two countries on the margins of the APEC meeting in November in San Francisco. Cooperation on the construction front between South Korea and Saudi Arabia dates back 5 decades. And in light of this milestone, the two countries have agreed to further bolster their endeavor on this front to building cities of the future and more. Our senior presidential correspondent Oh Soo-young explains.
President Yoon Suk-yeol mapped out the future of South Korea and Saudi Arabia's cooperation in the digital post-oil era, as construction and IT giants from each side penned major deals to build smart cities and infrastructure. This came as Yoon on Monday marked the 50th anniversary of South Korea's first entry into the Saudi construction sector at a multimedia exhibit in Riyadh showcasing the country's NEOM line, a linear car-free sustainable city projected to open in 2039.
처음에 2천만 불에서 시작한 양국의 건설 협력 규모는 반세기 만에 1,600억 불로 확대됐습니다.
Reflecting on the decades of Korean firms and workers involved in over 1,900 projects across Saudi Arabia, Yoon called for the two countries to now build on their solid foundation of cooperation to meet the evolving demands of the times.
사우디는 새로운 국가 비전의 일환으로 네옴시티와 같은 메가 프로젝트를 추진하고 있습니다. 여기에 한국이 보유하고 있는 첨단 도시 건설 역량을 결합한다면 양국이 함께 미래 도시의 새로운 모델을 전 세계에 보여줄 수 있습니다.
South Korea's Hamas Corporation first won a $24 million contract to build a 164-kilometer-long expressway in Saudi Arabia in 1973, which opened the door to more construction projects in the Middle East. This in turn became a stepping stone for South Korean firms to make a leap into the global market and play a major role in modernizing the country's economy. As he called for a new era of infrastructural cooperation, the president oversaw the signing of 4 major deals for Korean firms in Saudi, a $2.4 billion contract to work on the Jeju gas plant facility, a contract to build a digital twin platform, a virtual geospatial model of the real world for urban planning and management in 5 Saudi cities, along with an MOU on modular construction and an agreement to roll out digital infrastructure. Also on Monday, Yoon attended the Korea-Saudi Future Technologies Partnership Forum, where he discussed ways to strengthen collaboration on science and technology, focusing on 4 major fields including digital, clean energy, biohealth and space. Yoon's office says as both countries seek cutting-edge innovation and sustainability going forward, South Korea aims to increase joint research projects and people-to-people exchanges with Saudi Arabia, fostering a future-oriented partnership based on science and technology. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News, Riyadh.
And staying in Saudi Arabia for the first time in more than 40 years, Seoul and Riyadh issued a joint communique condemning civilian attacks amid the armed confrontation between Israel and Hamas. Our top office correspondent Kim Do-yeon covers this bilateral stance and more.
South Korea and Saudi Arabia jointly rejected actions targeting civilians in the escalating situation between Israel and Palestine, while agreeing to work with the international community for swift humanitarian assistance to suffering civilians. The statement also said the two sides stressed the importance of intensifying efforts to prevent the conflict from spreading and the need for political solution and durable peace based on the two-state solution. This as Seoul and Riyadh. came up with a joint statement on Tuesday, their first in 43 years, in light of President Yoon Suk-yeol's state visit to Saudi Arabia, hosted by Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. The statement, comprised of 44 specific items of cooperation between Seoul and Riyadh, covered all areas, from economic cooperation and cultural exchanges to regional security in the Middle East and East Asia. The two also agreed to actively explore the expansion of mutual investments in areas including the hydrogen economy, smart cities, future mobility means, and startups. As the two countries celebrate 50 years since South Korea's first construction project in Saudi Arabia, they agreed to continue building on this exchange with Saudi's ambitious Vision 2030 and NEOM project and other giga projects such as the Red Sea project. The statement also showed motivations for the two to enhance cooperation in defense and defense industry. In fact, on Monday, President Yoon also met with Khalid bin Salman Al Saud, Saudi defense minister, and other military officials, where they showed interest in jointly working with South Korea's arms production. The top office says this has paved the way for even more export deals for South Korean arms companies. Energy cooperation, conventional and new, was also mentioned in the statement. Saudi Arabia pledged to be the most reliable partner for crude oil, while South Korea is set to work with Riyadh for clean hydrogen and peaceful use of nuclear energy. Both sides also welcomed the growing popularity of Korean culture in Saudi Arabia and agreed expanding opportunities for civilian exchanges between the two countries. Kim Do-yeol, Arirang News.
Elsewhere in the Middle East, Palestinian militants set free 2 more Israeli hostages this past Monday. Our Lee Seung-jae has the latest.
Hamas announced Monday the release of 2 more Israeli hostages. This time, the militant group released 2 elderly women, aged 85 and 79 years old, who had been taken captive during a surprise attack on Israel by Hamas earlier this month. Hamas says the release was mediated by Egypt and Qatar. This follows the release of 2 Americans who on Friday also among the over 200 abducted by Hamas gunmen over 2 weeks ago. Meanwhile, Israel continues its offensive in Gaza, this time conducting a limited overnight raid in the Palestinian enclave. Israel says its incursions overnight from Sunday into Monday were partly intended to gather intelligence and had helped improve its military readiness. Hamas says its fighters hit back, launching 2 attack drones at military posts on Monday. The UN's World Food Program began distributing humanitarian aid in Gaza on Monday after trucks carrying some essential items were allowed into the region through the Rafah crossing. However, despite the much-needed help reaching the Gazans, WFP says the amount is far less than what's needed.
The truck crossing Rafah border are a small window of hope, but they are nowhere near enough to meet the rising needs of the people inside Gaza. We cannot afford to wait. We need to deliver life-saving supplies continuously and at a much larger scale.
According to health officials in Gaza, nearly 5,100 Palestinians have been killed in Gaza, with children reportedly making up 40% of the dead. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Also, in related news, Washington has dispatched a contingent of special operations advisors to Israel as forces that prepare for a large-scale ground mission into Gaza. Our Shin Se-byuk reports.
The U.S. on Monday sent its military advisors to Israel as the country continues preparations for a large-scale ground operation in Gaza.
What I can tell you is that that there are a few relevant military officers with experience, the kinds of experience that we believe is appropriate to the sorts of operations that Israel is conducting and may conduct in the future.
The spokesman didn't give the exact number of officers sent to Israel, but among them is Marine Corps Lieutenant General James Glynn, who previously helped lead Special Operations Forces against Islamic State. Kirby, however, said the timing and other details regarding the possible ground invasion were ultimately up to the Israeli government. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden, in a news briefing on Monday, rejected calls for a ceasefire on humanitarian grounds, saying the release of hostages must come first.
Ceasefire, we should have those hostages released, and then we can talk.
There have been reports that the U.S. has asked Israel to delay its anticipated ground invasion until more hostages are released. Hamas has taken over 200 people hostage during the October 7th attack on Israel. That includes foreigners and dual nationals, while the exact number has not been confirmed. U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller also rejected ceasefire calls, saying Hamas would benefit from such an action as it gives the group the ability to rest and prepare to continue launching attacks. Last week, the U.S. vetoed a UN Security Council resolution calling for humanitarian pauses, including a ceasefire and allowing aid to reach Gaza safely. However, Miller said Washington was separately working to facilitate the delivery of humanitarian aid.
We are working on a sustained mechanism to ensure that aid comes through the Rafah crossing consistently with the government of Egypt, the government of Israel, and the United Nations.
Some humanitarian aid began reaching Gaza after Biden negotiated a deal with Israel, allowing trucks to carry aid through the Rafah crossing on the Egyptian-Gaza border. However, much-needed fuel was not included in the delivery, something Miller said was due to possible fuel diversion by Hamas. The spokesman said the issue will be discussed with Israeli authorities. 신세벽, Arirang News.
In other news, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi is reportedly scheduled to visit the U.S. later this week amid much anticipation about a possible summit between the two countries on the margins of the APEC meeting in November in San Francisco. Our Yoon reports.
According to senior officials in Washington, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi is set to visit the U.S. Capitol from October 26th to 28th, where he'll meet with Secretary of State Antony Blinken and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. The diplomatic meeting comes as the war in Ukraine continues, and the U.S. looks to prevent the Israel-Hamas war from escalating into a wider conflict in the Middle East. China's close relations with Tehran prompted Blinken to speak with Wang earlier this month to urge Beijing to use its relationships with the countries in the Middle East to prevent the conflict from spreading. Other topics expected to be discussed include the South and East China Seas, cross-strait issues, and North Korea's provocations. But Wang's visit is expected to focus largely on discussing a possible meeting between the presidents of the two countries, potentially during the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit set to be held in San Francisco next month. Biden and Xi last met on the sidelines of the G20 in Bali in November of last year and have not spoken since. Relations between the two countries have deteriorated over a variety of issues, including trade, technology, human rights, the status of Taiwan, and China's stance on the war in Ukraine. They were further thrown into crisis when a Chinese spy balloon was shot down over U.S. territory earlier this year. Whether or not Wang will meet with President Biden during his current visit is yet to be seen, with the trip described as reciprocal to Blinken's visit to Beijing in June when he met with Chinese President Xi. While China has expressed interest in a Biden-Xi meeting, it has also pressed for concessions, such as the easing of U.S. export controls on advanced semiconductors and other strategically important technologies. As stated by State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller, there is no substitute for one-on-one conversations at the leader level, which remains hopeful for next month. Yoon, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, here in South Korea, 4 suspected North Korean defectors have been found in a small wooden boat in the waters east of Sokcho, Gangwon-do province. According to military authorities earlier on this Tuesday, the 4 people from North Korea have voiced their desire to defect to South Korea. Now, prior to this, the Joint Chiefs of Staff had reportedly been tracking this particular boat using its coastal surveillance equipment. Also, a South Korean fishing boat had spotted this particular boat and reported it to the local Coast Guard. Wholesale prices here in the country rose for the 3rd month in a row in September. Data from the Bank of Korea on Tuesday shows the Producer Price Index, an indicator of future inflation, gained 0.4% on month in September. The gain has been linked to higher global oil prices and their impact on prices of coal, oil and chemical products. With regard to price prospects for this month, the central bank shared uncertainty, citing rampant fluctuations in oil prices worldwide in light of fresh geopolitical tensions in the Middle East. The Jeju 4-3 archives have been selected as a candidate for the UNESCO Memory of the World program by the Korean National Commission for UNESCO. The archives include records of victims, trials, and U.S. military documents related to the April 3rd incident on Jeju Island, which was a culmination of civilian protests between 1947 and 1948 against U.S. military-led rule. The protests were met with brutal suppression from the government that resulted in the loss of some 30,000 lives. Members of Jeju's 4-3 Peace Foundation have been leading efforts to ensure the events are remembered and have published English versions of their material. If successful, the 4-3 archives are expected to be inscribed as a UNESCO Memory of the World in the year 2025. And there's been a fresh vote of support for Korea's port city of Busan as a popular travel destination. According to city officials on this Tuesday, Busan shared the #1 spot with Vienna in this year's popular upcoming attractions by travel service platform Trip.com that took into account 1,211 cities worldwide. The result follows consumers and judges' votes based on user reviews, searches, purchases, ratings, and subscriptions. Busan, meanwhile, is hoping to bring home the 2030 World Expo. October here in Korea is said to be the month of culture. That being said, my colleague Song Yoo-jin was recently at Sinangun County in Jeollanam-do Province. That is the bigger host of this year's cultural agenda. Do take a look.
Way down in the southern part of South Korea is Sinangun County in Jeollanam-do Province. This area is made up of more than 1,000 small islands. One of these islands is Cheondo, the host of this year's Culture Month. Korea has celebrated October as Culture Month since 1972 to deepen public appreciation and engagement with the arts and culture. Different places have taken their turn in hosting the celebration, but Cheondo is the first island to do so. One of the highlights this year was a lecture by American artist James Turrell. Hailed as the virtuoso of light, he's known for his large-scale installations using light and space, such as his Sky Space series. Throughout his 6-decade career, Turrell has developed a strong passion for showcasing art in areas that are mostly inaccessible.
We generally look at culture as being in the big cities. Of course, that makes a certain kind of culture as well, and I'm very interested in taking art into nature. Because then you can have a more powerful expression. I think also it's good sometimes to take a journey to go to art, so that helps prepare you for it.
This idea fits perfectly with Sinangun County's Island and Art project, which aims to change its isolated remote islands into places for art. Part of this plan is building the James Turrell Art Museum on Nodae-do Island.
Nodae is the island that I think would be very good for this. I like it partly because there's no bridge, that is, you actually have to journey by boat, another way to get there. And also, this surrounding of water completely is something I think is special.
Another standout is music. Students from a local elementary school put on the Sinan traditional performance Handai, featuring dancing and singing. 104 pianists representing the 1,004 islands of Sinan took the stage, playing classical music to traditional Korean folk songs. So from hosting this year's Culture Month to its goal of becoming a hub for world-renowned artists, Sinangun County is evolving into a new center for arts and culture. Song Yoo-jin, Arirang News, Sinan.
Meanwhile, on the football field, Tottenham Hotspurs Son HeungMin's goal and assist secured his team a 2-0 victory over Fulham on Monday night. Playing at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium in London, Son scored his 7th league goal of the season in the 36th minute. He then went on to assist teammate James Maddison in the 54th minute to seal victory. Seoul moves up to second place in the race for the Premier League Golden Foot, alongside Liverpool's Mohamed Salah, with whom he shared the goal-scoring prize in the year 2021-2022 season. This latest 2-0 victory also places Tottenham on top of the league, 2 points ahead of Manchester City and Arsenal.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. On Monday, the foreign ministers of Armenia and Azerbaijan met in Iran for talks to resolve the conflict over the disputed enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh. Since Azerbaijan's large-scale military offensive on September 19th into Nagorno-Karabakh, over 100,000 ethnic Armenian inhabitants have fled from their homes. The two countries' foreign ministers were joined at the Tehran summit by officials from Russia, Turkey, and Iran. A joint declaration was signed denouncing Western influences in the region, as well as agreeing to work toward peace in Nagorno-Karabakh. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, commented in an interview that the conflict has been mostly settled and that both sides agreed that Karabakh belongs to Azerbaijan. Russia has been playing the role as a security guarantor between Azerbaijan and Armenia, both countries that were once part of the Soviet Union. American oil giant Chevron announced Monday the purchase of rivals Hess Corporation in a $53 billion all-stock deal. Chevron will pay for Hess using their own stock, meaning Hess shareholders will receive 1.0250 shares in Chevron, worth about $171 in cash terms for each Hess share. The Chevron-Hess mega deal comes less than 2 weeks after ExxonMobil's acquisition of Pioneer Natural Resources for around $60 billion. It also widens the gap in terms of fossil fuels, with European energy rivals who have shifted focus to renewable resources. The deal's a boost for major US oil firms as they move to secure supply amid geopolitical conflict in Europe and the Middle East. An off-duty Alaska Airlines pilot has been charged with 83 counts of attempted murder after allegedly trying to turn off aircraft engines mid-flight. Named as Joseph David Emerson in arrest documents, the suspect had been riding in the cockpit's jump seat as an off-duty pilot on Sunday night when, according to an Alaska Airlines statement, he unsuccessfully attempted to disrupt the operation of the engines. Alaska Flight 2059, operated by Horizon Air, was en route from Seattle to San Francisco with 80 passengers on board when the incident was reported to air traffic control. After the flight was diverted to Oregon's Portland Airport, Emerson was arrested by airport police. Sweet boy Bobby, the world's oldest dog, has died at the age of 31 years and 165 days. Born on the 11th of May 1992, the brown and white Portuguese Mastiff lived an exceptionally long life compared to his breed's average of 12 to 14 years. He passed away last Saturday in the Portuguese village of Conqueiros, where he was born and raised. Bobby lived for 2 years longer than the previous record holder, an Australian cattle dog called Bluey, who died in 1939. Kim Si-young, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. We're into the last stretch of autumn, known as Sanggang, the onset of frosty weather. In 2 weeks, we will be ushering in Ipdong, the official beginning of winter on the seasonal calendar. But for today, the chill is not a significant issue. However, some regions in Gangwon-do province remain under a dry weather advisory. The south is seeing sunny skies today. Meanwhile, the central regions will be seeing passing showers starting from the west and extending towards the capital by mid-afternoon. Seoul could receive between 5 to 10 millimeters of precipitation with thunder and lightning during the day. Afternoon highs are expected to be similar, if not slightly higher than previous days, at 19 degrees Celsius here in the capital and in the early 20s for the rest of the country. Looking ahead, the Seoul forecast suggests a mix of rain and clouds persisting throughout the work week, whereas the southern regions can enjoy a stretch of sunny weather. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
And those are the headlines at this hour here in Korea. We have our panel session coming up right after this break, so do stay with us. Thank you for now.